Start with contracting sprites. Chapter 356, Targeting the Dark Society Heavenly King. The waves hung in mid-air, rolling and roaring. There was also dazzling lightning flashing constantly, illuminating the sky. It looked like the end of the world. Su Hao named this tactic Ocean Boss. It was a tactic that was suitable to deal with large sprites of attributes apart from water and ice. The rolling waves and the wandering thunder lasted for 20 to 30 seconds. Then, the violent energy finally dissipated, and the doomsday scene gradually became peaceful. Tai Yu, Tong Jie, and the others rode on the flying sprite and looked into the distance. They swallowed their saliva and asked, Did he kill it? They were only asking rhetorically. Everyone wanted to know, but the answer couldn't be provided. It shouldn't be that easy. In the sky, Black and White Heavenly King pondered. Even though the scene he created looks very powerful and dramatic, it's just ordinary energy after all. Compared to energy killer moves, it's still inferior. The Sand Earthworm Dragon is also good at defense. However, after taking such a move, even if the Sand Earthworm Dragon survived, it definitely suffered serious injuries. For a master-level little rascal to be able to do this, it's still really impressive. No wonder many seniors in the Union think highly of him. The Black and White Heavenly King couldn't help but be surprised. He looked into the distance and stared at the gradually dissipating turbulent sea. At this moment, the earthworm did not appear. Why can't I see it? Did it burrow into the ground again? Tai Yu and the others, who were riding flying sprites, were still so scared that they hurriedly moved to a higher altitude even though they were several kilometers away. But they were immediately confused. That's not right. Wasn't a sea just raised? It is separate from the ground. If it burrowed underground, it would definitely be discovered. They were thinking nervously. At this moment, the desolate mountainous area had already formed a swamp under the pouring of the surging waves. In the air, there were still elemental particles that were shaking violently after the energy tide dissipated. Su Hao gazed ahead. On the interface, there was only the icon of butterfly and the other sprites in the nearby area. Tai Yu and the others were a few kilometers away, and were already outside the range of the map. Naturally, there was also no sand earthworm icon. In fact, the Sand Earthworm Dragon had already disappeared 3 to 4 seconds after the Ocean Boss tactic. It was summoned away. Su Hao knew, but he couldn't stop it. Ayan's Shadow Gankun could affect space, but it couldn't interfere with the enemy under the terrifying energy tide just now. They could only watch helplessly as it disappeared. They felt wronged. Sob. Dark Society Heavenly King. After the Sand Earthworm Dragon disappeared, Butterfly and the others stopped inputting energy, but the doomsday disaster continued for a long time before gradually dissipating. A few extraordinary ranks caused such a huge destruction. What if there were a few monarch ranks? No wonder the Union would do everything in their power to annihilate the terrorist organization bases that exist on planet Aquamarine the moment they discover them. In comparison, the urgency on the spirit summoning world side is lower. Monarch rank is truly terrifying. Su Hao sighed and looked at Butterfly. At this moment, Butterfly landed on the soft cloud and sat on its knees. Its fingers were crossed, its eyes were closed, and its antennae were taut. It was searching for the illusion imprint it left on the Sand Earthworm Dragon. A hidden imprint that was deliberately left behind. But Su Hao didn't have much hope. He just had the mentality of, since it doesn't cost anything, we can give it a try. In the end. Gurgle. What, you said you vaguely sensed the mark? Is the Dark Society's Heavenly King really nearby? Su Hao didn't know whether to criticize the Heavenly King for being so careless, or to be thankful that the other party only sent out one monarch. It was true. An ordinary master level very likely only had one extraordinary. But ordinary Heavenly King big bosses usually didn't only have one monarch. With the Heavenly King domain and the rich accumulation from many years ago, new Heavenly Kings could often produce another monarch rank sprite. Whether it was the heavenly kings of the Union, the heavenly kings of the Dark Society, or the heavenly kings of alien tribes. Heavenly kings who had just broken through would definitely stay in their lairs and convert their accumulation into strength. It was commonly known as seclusion. Then, perhaps this Dark Society heavenly king is relatively poor and doesn't have the money to raise a second monarch sprite. Or could it be that his other sprites are very far away and can't be summoned? Both were possible. He couldn't rule out the possibility that the Dark Society heavenly king had left a trump card by his side. So, chase. Su Hao only thought for half a second before slapping the dumb unicorn. The colorful cloud flew into the sky with a whoosh. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared from the vision of Tai Yu, Tong Jie, and the others. It took them a long time to react. In the sky, Black and White Heavenly King was stunned. The Holy Brilliance Spirit and Dark Star Spirit beside him immediately brought him to chase. As a senior Heavenly King, the Black and White Heavenly King naturally wouldn't be like that embarrassing sand earthworm dragon, unable to catch up to the extraordinary water Kylan. After all, his two sprites could fly. In his vision, Su Hao's cloud did not get bigger but instead gradually shrank. Black and White Heavenly King slowly revealed a puzzled look. Then, he turned and looked at the two sprites. What is going on? The Holy Brilliance Spirit and Dark Star Spirit looked innocent. They also wanted to know. White clouds drifted over the lush woods. Before long, Black and White Heavenly King flew out of the battlefield area full of water. The young man flying on the cloud was still in his line of sight. They couldn't catch up, but at least they didn't lose him. The Black and White Heavenly King secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Isn't this the direction where the last officer of the Dark Society escaped? Agumu and the other members of the Dark Society who might be important had already been marked by Black and White Heavenly King with his unique secret manual. He wasn't afraid of those people getting away. He knew he could capture them after the main battle ended. But he didn't expect that under such a dangerous situation just now, this young man was actually able to get his sprite to leave a mark. The young man had strength. He also had strategy. The Black and White Heavenly King exclaimed, "In that case, there's only one last thing left." He cast his gaze into the distance. Not long ago, Black and White Heavenly King had also determined that the sand earthworm dragon was probably summoned away by the enemy. Since it was sprite commandeering, there were traces to follow. The Black and White Heavenly King latched onto the traces and was finally able to determine where the Heavenly King of Dark Society was at this moment. He revealed a confident smile and got the two sprites to bring him to their destination. As he flew. Why is the young man riding the cloud still ahead of me? The Black and White Heavenly King recalled. Just now, when the colorful cloud flew to a certain place, two sprites came down from above. They were Flaming Spirit Crow and Eternal Night Glory Concubine. The two sprites flew to the left. The colorful cloud slightly changed its direction and flew to the right. On the right, perhaps. It was where the high-level officer of the Dark Society was. How did he find it? Or is it just a coincidence? The cloud flew the entire way. The Black and White Heavenly King also chased the entire way. Finally, just as the Heavenly King was about to lose track of the cloud, the colorful cloud stopped. And then, Chapter 357, Black and White Heavenly King, it's finally my turn to. Hey? Somewhere in the mountain range. Underground, in the empty space dug out by an earth element sprite. Whoosh! Ripples appeared in the surrounding space. A sand earthworm dozens of meters long suddenly appeared, its body still carrying water stains and thunder arcs. The hard yellow-brown armor was already badly damaged at this point, falling apart like pieces of huge rocks. With a bang, it turned into the purest elemental particles and dissipated in the world. It was covered in wounds, no longer as fierce and domineering as it was a few minutes ago. It wanted to roar in grievance, but it was suddenly glared at by Dark Society Heavenly King. "Shut up, be quiet and heal properly." The Heavenly King of the Dark Society took out high-level healing potions. Among them, there was no lack of special supplementary versions produced by the Green Shade Group specially for the experts of the Union. The effect was extremely strong. Countless light particles sprayed out and attached to the sand earthworm dragon's body. In just a while, the earthworm dragon's injured body healed by a large margin. A strange-looking snake-headed demon held a solidified staff and sprinkled sparkling yellow light. The effects of the two overlapped. The sand earthworm dragon's dispirited aura also improved a little. If it were an extraordinary level sprite, even if it was on the verge of death, under such treatment conditions, it could instantly become lively. Monarch rank life force was too strong, so it was naturally difficult for them to recover. Seeing that the sand earthworm dragon's aura gradually calmed down and no longer overflowed with energy due to injuries, the Dark Society Heavenly King finally heaved a sigh of relief. But his expression was still as dark as the bottom of a pot. I actually lost to a young brat. Ridiculous. If not for the fact that my gargoyle dragon was killed by the Union a year ago, how would I have ended up in this state today? Damn it! The more the Dark Society Heavenly King thought about it, the angrier he became. He had already deeply remembered Su Hao's appearance. When we return, I must mobilize all my energy to find out your identity. This matter isn't over. You will pay for provoking a Dark Society Heavenly King. Boom! The entire underground space shook violently, shaking as countless gravel fell. The Heavenly King of the Dark Society could sense a terrifying energy crashing down from above. His expression changed. Earth yellow energy curled around the sand earthworm dragon and it swept the Dark Society Heavenly King and the extraordinary snake-headed demon onto its body, enveloping them in a yellow halo. Then, it suddenly burrowed into the ground. Boom! The top of the underground space cracked, and a stream of black smoke emerged from the crack. In the next moment, the whole space collapsed completely. One could vaguely see a huge shadow energy ball with an unknown diameter smashing down from above. It exploded. Boom! Violent air waves spread out in circles, sending countless trees and rocks flying, leaving behind a huge pit. There was residual aura, but no trace of the sand earthworm dragon. As expected, it escaped again. On the cloud, Su Hao frowned, feeling that the situation was a little tricky. Without it, the sand earthworm escaped from the ground. Its speed might not be very fast, but being dozens of meters deep in the ground was enough for it to be safe from many attacks. And it was impossible for Su Hao to constantly lock onto Heavenly King of the Dark Society. As expected, I still have to take action at the critical moment. When Black and White Heavenly King thought of this, he actually felt a little excited. He looked down at the direction of the high-level officer of the Dark Society with some admiration. Thank you for your hard work in escaping so that I don't have to be a bystander. As he thought about it, he didn't stop. After executing several sprite commandeering techniques, the figure of the Dark Star Spirit on the right gradually became illusionary. The first stage of the Dark Star Spirit's evolution was its spirit body. Therefore, it was not difficult for it to transform from a physical body to an incorporeal spirit. And its incorporeal body was able to pass through the ground. With his Dark Star Spirit's strength, it wouldn't be too hard for him to deal with an already injured monarch sprite. Go! Before the Black and White Heavenly King finished speaking, he saw the young man standing on the clouds in the distance, seemingly sighing. And then, a black shadow appeared behind him, turned into a dark light, and shot underground. Butterfly Fairy, who was standing beside the young man, flapped its butterfly wings slightly. With a bang, its entire body disappeared like a dream bubble. It seemed to have already gone underground. Black and White Heavenly King. At the side, the Dark Star Spirit turned its head and asked with its eyes, "What do we do?" The Black and White Heavenly King looked conflicted. Let's wait a little longer. After all, the enemy is used to being underground, and he only has 2 sprites that can burrow into the ground. There's a high chance that this union's genius is not their match. When the time comes. Well, when the time comes, we'll appear in a cool manner and get rid of that sand earthworm dragon with a gorgeous secret manual. Perfect. He thought. At the side, the dark star spirit stared at him for a while and sighed. On the colorful cloud, as he watched Ayan fly down, Su Hao felt that his sense of security had decreased a lot. In order to arrest the Dark Society Heavenly King, I have truly sacrificed too much. Underground. The sand earthworm dragon, which was constantly moving, had its whole head explode again, as if it was hit by a huge hammer, buzzing. The spiritual explosion wasn't as fierce as before. But now, the sand earthworm dragon was only at half health and its condition wasn't good. It couldn't help but stiffen. A black-robed figure appeared in front of it. Its two palms stretched infinitely, and its pupils were like vortexes. The sand earthworm dragon felt that something was dragging it in. It roared angrily, and the earth and yellow light shook. With a bang, it shattered the inexplicable power enveloping its body. But at this moment, Butterfly, which had appeared at the tail of the sand earthworm dragon, went all out. Its emerald green long hair was raised in an anti-gravity manner. Its eyes were as bright as light, and the air around it was buzzing. Its little face was focused and solemn as it pressed its hands down. It was not a terrifying scene, nor was there any violent energy tied. But on the sand earthworm dragon, thin wounds suddenly appeared one after another. The wounds kept spreading. It roared in pain, and the yellow light became dazzling. As its tail swung, the surrounding space became sluggish. Countless soil and rocks were shattered like tofu, directly whipped towards the sprite locked by the sand earthworm dragon's aura. Boom! Butterfly disappeared like a bubble, but it didn't dare to get too close. It only moved far away, and invisible spiritual threads shot out from its body and wrapped around the sand earthworm dragon. Ayan flung its black robe. 1, 2, 10. Hundreds of ghost element sprites suddenly appeared. Like ghosts, they danced around the Yama Ghost King. Every ghost element sprite was not strong, but their auras even resonated together. Buzz! Buzz! Rings of dark light spread, and terrifying energy tides rose underground. A person standing in the sky couldn't see through the ground. But one could see that the whole area was shaking ceaselessly, as if the fiercest earthquake had erupted. Countless rocks rolled down, and muffled sounds came from time to time. After a while, boom! Another huge hole was blasted in the pitiful ground. Sand danced in the air. The sand earthworm dragon's body was coiled at the edge of the hole. Its bronze bell-sized eyes looked into the distance, at the colorful clouds and the people on them. At the same time, Su Hao saw the figure standing on the sand earthworm dragon. The figure had a medium build and was wearing expensive battle equipment. He was wearing a mask made of special materials. It was a mask that kept its owner safe from special investigations. This person was the Dark Society Heavenly King. Chapter 358, Returning to Nature. A sandstorm erupted, and its energy was like a tide, causing the ground to sink inch by inch. Su Hao stood on the colorful cloud with a calm expression. He only glanced at the interface and let the dumb unicorn fly a short distance away. Then, he connected the big fat bear's vision with sprite commandeering, visual sharing and used the bear as a battlefield observation device. The dumb unicorn needed to be wary of its surroundings. Its attention couldn't just be focused on the sand earthworm dragon. Butterfly, Ayan, and the others were too fast. Su Hao could only share vision, but it was a little uncomfortable as some of the information wasn't synced. This issue could be solved if Su Hao used same frequency, but the consumption for that was too great. Well, the main thing is that by looking down from the sky, I can have better control of the battle situation. Why did big bosses like Senior Wu and Heavenly King Lai Kong like to stay in the air so much? It was all because they could act cool. Ah, no, it was all because it was easier for them to observe. Only when one was looking from above could one control the overall situation. If one couldn't fly, how could he be called a big boss? As an outstanding figure of the younger generation in the Union, Su Hao felt that he should learn from all the big bosses and watch the scene quietly with his hands behind his back. Unfortunately, Effa wasn't around and couldn't hold an umbrella for him. In the pit, the Heavenly King of the Dark Society, who was standing at the head of the earthworm, concealed his expression. But at this moment, the injured earthworm dragon was clearly starting to get anxious. The yellow-brown sandstorm danced and swept like dragons. Forests collapsed one after another, and countless holes and ravines were smashed into the ground. But the black and emerald figures could always dodge the attack nimbly. In terms of defense, Big Fat Bear was undoubtedly the strongest among the many sprites. And in terms of life-saving abilities, the Dumb Unicorn could only be ranked third. It was just fast. In comparison, Ayan's shadow travel was not any slower than Dumb Unicorn for a short period of time. It could even ignore the terrain obstacles. Its Gankun in the shadow allowed it to hide even its own body. At this moment, destructive energy erupted. From afar, it looked like a huge upside-down earthen yellow bowl spreading out at an extremely fast speed. Everywhere it passed, everything was swallowed up. Ayan didn't have time to turn into a dark light and pass through, but when it saw this, its black robe had rolled up, its figure, as well as the hundreds of ghost element sprites that formed a battle formation with it, disappeared together. After a long while, it appeared again. Shadow energy resonated, and the huge shadow energy ball with a diameter of 10 meters formed in an instant and was thrown down. The explosion made the sand earthworm dragon dizzy. Butterfly had even more life-saving methods. Its figure sometimes burst like bubbles, and at other times, it turned into countless illusion butterflies the size of a palm and flew in all directions. At other times, it would exchange positions with one of its clones. Or, it could directly hide. As long as Butterfly completely disappeared, the Heavenly King of the Dark Society wouldn't be able to determine where Butterfly was. Which is why hiding abilities are as important as escaping abilities. The Dark Society Heavenly King was a very good example of what would happen to you if you had poor hiding abilities. He had been discovered because his concealment ability was too poor, and he wasn't fast enough to escape when they came looking for him. Su Hao reminded himself not to make the same mistake. He made the Dumb Unicorn fly a few hundred meters higher again. At this moment, the battlefield shifted a few times. Countless wild sprites fled in fear. Those that were slightly slower were completely swallowed by the energy impact. Ayan and Butterfly were still chasing closely. Knowing the battle tactics of the sand earthworm dragon, they dodged and chased after it. On the huge earthworm dragon's head, the Dark Society Heavenly King realized that if this continued, it would be very difficult for him to escape. He could only take a risk. Boom! The earthworm dragon swung its tail and hit the gravel that filled the sky. Its dragon head also turned to look at the figure in the distance above the clouds. Heavenly King of the Dark Society looked at the figure and slowly raised his right hand. In his gloved palm was a white crystal. Su Hao didn't understand what he was doing. In an instant, a rich yellow light blossomed from the Dark Society Heavenly King's body and rushed into the sky. Continuous mountain shadows appeared behind Heavenly King of the Dark Society. It was his domain. A completely explosive domain. Strength poured in continuously. In an instant, the aura of the sand earthworm dragon, which was a little dispirited, increased exponentially, raising howling whines. Circles of earth and yellow light erupted from the earthworm dragon's body and spread. Dozens of meters. Hundreds of meters. A few thousand meters. It was a truly impressive domain. Within the range, the ground seemed to come alive. The hills and rocks turned into brown-yellow soil dragons, roaring as they attacked Ayan and Butterfly. What's that? Hundreds of kilometers away, the Union army stopped again. Looking into the distance, they noticed a huge, pale yellow oval-shaped object letting out a cry of surprise. They looked at each other and asked questions. If they joined in on such a battle, would they be able to survive? It's a domain. Mo Tao spoke with an uncertain tone. Heavenly King domain? Such a large area? Tai Yu asked. Mo Tao shook his head. It's not a Heavenly King domain, but a monarch domain. Only experts among monarch ranks have the qualifications to open up their own domain. But, that sand earthworm dragon can't be a high-class monarch. Even so, Mo Tao still looked worried. What exactly will the situation evolve into? Buzz. The earth and yellow light enveloped the sky and earth, and it seemed as if everything was frozen. Ayan had just rolled up its black robe when it paused. Butterfly also sent warning signals. The domain was sealing off space. Naturally, the surrounding space wasn't completely sealed off. The brownish-yellow halo in front of Su Hao wasn't a real domain either, but it happened to hit Ayan and Butterfly. If not for Butterfly's experience in the Illusion Palace, it wouldn't have been able to determine that something was wrong at the first moment. Boom! The surging energy tide spread again. After a while, the earth and yellow halo that enveloped an area of thousands of meters had already shrunk by more than half. The heaven and earth phenomena and the feeling that the ground was seemingly coming to life also disappeared. The aura of the sand earthworm dragon, which had reached its peak, also dropped a level. But it was still strong. At the same time, Ayan's figure emerged from the shadow behind Su Hao. Its aura was a little weak. Butterfly was nervously staring at the spinning precious ball in front of it. After a long while, it finally let out a long sigh of relief. It's too dangerous, gurgle. Looking at this scene, Dark Society Heavenly King's face under the mask became even darker. But he still puffed up his aura, looking unconcerned. As he looked into the distance at the genius of the Union who had forced him into such a miserable state, he spoke in a not-so-fluent Dragon Nation language, his voice condensing into a beam that spread out. Young man, enough. If you don't want both sides to suffer. Seeing that Su Hao didn't say anything, Dark Society Heavenly King continued. You're already a prodigy of the Union, and your mission has been completed perfectly, so why are you doing this to me? If you let me leave safely, I can give you a few intel on the internal affairs of the Dark Society and let you achieve a meteoric rise. Otherwise... He paused, and his voice became cold and hoarse. Otherwise, just wait for both sides to suffer heavily. I might not be the strongest, but I'm still a heavenly king. The aura of the sand earthworm dragon rose again. It confirmed the Dark Society Heavenly King's words. He still had a trump card. Perhaps Su Hao would pay a huge price for it, bringing him fatal danger. If he wanted to kill him, there was a risk of being killed. This was a dilemma. How will you choose? In the sky, Black and White Heavenly King also became a little nervous at this moment. Indeed, letting the Dark Society Heavenly King leave was the safest choice, but the Alliance's attitude towards the Dark Society had always been very firm. If every Sprite trainer gave up the encirclement of the Dark Society because they were afraid of the risk, how could there be such a peaceful modern society today? It would have long been infiltrated and destroyed by the experts of alien tribes. Of course, with Su Hao's contributions, identity, and potential, no matter how he chose, he would still be considered a genius and receive special care from the Union. But the Black and White Heavenly King still hoped to hear the answer he wanted. At this moment, the atmosphere seemed to have frozen. On the colorful cloud, Su Hao weighed the pros and cons. He felt that the Dark Society Heavenly King's suggestion was pretty good. And as an adult, he wanted information on the Dark Society's internal affairs, but he also wanted the Dark Society Heavenly King's head. What should he do? He came up with a perfect solution. He could just ensure his safety first, and then go about capturing the Dark Society Heavenly King. Time ticked by. Su Hao frowned, looking conflicted. He said and paused again. He seemed to be afraid that his sprite would be injured, but he was also unwilling to let a dark society heavenly king leave his sight. On the sand earthworm's head, the heavenly king of the dark society was waiting. The corners of his mouth under the mask finally curled up slightly. In the end, he's still young and naive. Suddenly, the heavenly king's eyes widened as he looked at the sky above him. He vaguely sensed that water vapor was condensing. How dare you? Under the mask, his gaze became resolute. The sand earthworm dragon let out a deafening roar. Just as the sky gradually darkened and dark clouds gathered, a dazzling yellow light erupted again. It encompassed thousands of meters. Within the range, broken rocks of different sizes flew up noisily. The earth rolled and surged like a wave, rapidly approaching the core, where the sand earthworm dragon was. An extremely terrifying energy wave was rapidly brewing. Hoo! Hoo! The wind was howling, and the raindrops that had just begun to fall were instantly washed away. In Su Hao's eyes, countless soil and rocks gathered and closed on the sand earthworm dragon. In just 3 to 2 seconds, with the sand earthworm dragon as the core, a huge rock dragon appeared on the ground. It was still growing. Rocks gathered, and its bodies lengthened. 200 meters, 500 meters, 1000 meters. The 1,000-meter-long giant rock dragon covered the sky, roared, stood up, and pounced at the colorful clouds in the sky. Halfway through, a dazzling yellow light blossomed from the rock dragon's body. It turned the whole sky into dusk in an instant. The energy that had been brewing to the extreme was released in an instant. Boom! The ground was torn apart. The earth-yellow energy shock wave instantly covered the colorful cloud and everyone on the cloud that was 2,000 to 3,000 meters high. In the distance, on the east side, a white light beam shot out and flew towards the colorful cloud. But just as it flew out, it stopped midway, as if it had just discovered something. It turned around and disappeared with a whoosh. Thousands of meters away. Damn, that scared me. Looking at the lifelike illusion that was swallowed up and the terrifying disaster scene in front of him, Su Hao broke out in cold sweat. Truly. They had to travel 7 to 8 kilometers to be safe. The existence of a heavenly king was indeed terrifying. At this moment, even though they were several kilometers away, Su Hao could still feel the strong wind blowing. The core of the explosion seemed like it had been baptized by nuclear equilibrium. Energy tides kept coming, and wild sprites that were slightly closer died on the spot. There was no more color between heaven and earth, only earth yellow light filling the sky, piercing through the clouds. After a long time, the seemingly substantial energy tide gradually dissipated. Suddenly, a huge rock dragon that maintained its flying posture appeared in front of him. It was 1,000 meters long and shocking. From the dragon's head, the rocks fell off inch by inch, shattered, and disappeared. Soon, the figure of the sand earthworm dragon appeared at the core. It also maintained its roar. The two dragon horns, one long and one short, seemed to be shimmering with some residual energy. But, along with the rock dragon, the sand earthworm dragon also disappeared inch by inch from its head, turning into the purest earth elemental particles. Like countless fireflies, it gradually disappeared between heaven and earth. It disappeared without a trace. It had already returned to nature. Only an earth-yellow hexagonal crystal was left floating down from the sky. Under the sunlight, it was glistening. Chapter 359, End. Is that, the crystal of nature? Even though it was very far away and was as tiny as dust in Su Hao's vision, it still emitted wisps of light. When the sand earthworm dragon completely turned into light and disappeared, the slowly falling hexagonal crystal became even more eye-catching. Butterfly flapped its wings and flew forward. Just as it flew out, it seemed to have thought of something and stopped. It stretched out its finger and pointed forward. Ripples spread out, and a butterfly fairy identical to it came out from the ripples. With a flap of its butterfly wings, its entire body was like a flowing light. In just a moment, it appeared in front of the earthen yellow crystal and reached out to grab it. It examined it carefully before taking it back. Gurgle. It's a crystal of nature, but its quality is very ordinary. It's a level lower than the one the big fat bear absorbed. One reason for this was that the sand earthworm dragon was relatively weak. The second reason had to do with the other party's final self-destructing attack. It had lost the power of its source. But it was still a rather precious treasure. Gurgle. You're asking how much it's worth? Well, this value is very difficult to measure with numbers. How should I put it? It's probably equivalent to a relatively cheap top-notch treasure. Coup. It was clearly very valuable spoils of war, but why did it feel so ordinary when it was associated with top-notch treasures? There was no excitement at all. Why is it like this? Sob. Butterfly thought about it, and still. Gurgle. Sigma, Sigma, Omega? Sigma. Well, it's time to put an end to the Dark Society Heavenly King. Su Hao looked down. At this moment, the 1,000-meter-long giant rock dragon disappeared with the wind. On the ground, a huge rift that was 2,000 to 3,000 meters long appeared. Around the rift, countless hideous cracks spread like spider webs. Many huge rocks were still rolling down. The violent energy flow formed a hurricane and didn't dissipate for a long time. In his perception, the elements were still chaotic. Even under the cleansing of nature, the traces here would take a long time to disperse. However, when Su Hao flew down and lowered his height, an icon finally appeared on the interface of the canyon filled with death aura. It was an armored tremor pig king. According to its location, it should be deep under the hidden valley. It didn't move. Pretending to be dead. Do you want me to think that the Heavenly King of the Dark Society killed himself with the self-destruction just now? Was he trying to die with his enemies? Not only that, the armored tremor pig king should have been summoned just before the huge rock dragon self-destructed. He guessed. The Dark Society Heavenly King must have also guessed that Su Hao had a way to leave a mark on a sprite. He couldn't get rid of it, so he simply abandoned the snake-headed demon. As for the Dark Society Heavenly King himself, before the protective screen shattered, he wouldn't be negatively affected. Naturally, he wasn't marked. This method. Su Hao shook his head. But he had to admit that if it wasn't for Butterfly's sharp senses and sensing that something was wrong, he would have almost been fooled. The members of the Dark Society are clearly known to be crazy, but why do I feel that the higher UPS are more cowardly? At this moment, seeing that the icons on the map were still, Su Hao made the dumb unicorn fly a little lower. Then, he took out the healing spray and some recovery supplies. They were all high-level goods, so he used them all. Before long, Butterfly and Ayan had both recovered to 80 to 90% before flapping their butterfly wings or waving their black robes and flying down from the colorful cloud. Butterfly's figure turned incorporeal, and Ayan moved through the shadows. Not long after, the two sprites appeared again and flew back to the temporary cloud formation. Ayan's black robe shook, and an armored tremor pig king that had already fallen into the illusion appeared in front of Su Hao. Ayan's black robe trembled again. A middle-aged man with messy hair was thrown out. At this moment, he looked a little miserable. Although his eyes were closed, the expression on his face made him look very frightened. Perhaps he was in an illusion, experiencing something that couldn't be described. He glanced at Butterfly. Butterfly looked innocent. All right. He waved his hand. Ayan rolled up his black robe and put away the spoils of war. They were locked in a solitary cell in the shadow space. Then, Su Hao glanced at Butterfly. Butterfly looked at him. Oh right, the siege battle is still ongoing. It's time to go back. I wonder if those Dark Society members have been captured. Also, he looked at Ayan's black robe and asked, I remember that a few instructors from Rainforest University and their sprites are still in your shadow space, right? Who? Ayan nodded. After they were taken in from the base of the stronghold, there had been continuous battles. There was simply no chance for them to release the instructors of Rainforest University. Of course, Su Hao wouldn't admit that when he was tracking the Dark Society Heavenly King and flying near the valley not long ago, he had temporarily forgotten that there were still so many people in Ayan's shadow space. Anyway, the process wasn't important. It was good enough that everyone was now fine. Whew. All right, let them go now. Wait. He paused. This place seems to be quite far from the Stronghold Valley. We have to bring them back after we let them out anyway. Why don't we keep them in there for now? Who? Ayan nodded obediently. Su Hao looked at a certain area in the sky and retracted his gaze. He patted the dumb unicorn and flew towards the valley on the cloud. His figure gradually disappeared into the devastated valley area. In the sky, the black and white Heavenly King had been in a daze since just now. It wasn't until Su Hao flew away that he gradually regained his senses. How did they capture a Heavenly King just like that? He felt that it was too magical. The black and white Heavenly King himself had never captured a high-level official of the Dark Society before. He had defeated one before. However, the difficulty of capturing one was on a completely different level. How exactly did he do it? The black and white Heavenly King gradually recalled. He thought about how not long ago, the young inspector had cleverly used tactics to defeat the sand earthworm dragon. A flash of light suddenly appeared in his mind. I got it. All his previous attacks were laying the groundwork, creating a situation where he barely defeated the sand earthworm dragon, in order to let Heavenly King of the Dark Society summon the injured sprite back. Through this, the young inspector was able to find the location of Heavenly King of the Dark Society. In the second battle, he used continuous harassment to force the Heavenly King of the Dark Society into a dead end. At this time, from Heavenly King's point of view, he indeed had no choice but to choose mutual destruction. But that's not all, Black and White Heavenly King thought. This Inspector Su Hao, he even calculated the character of the Dark Society Heavenly King and deliberately gave the other party a chance. If not for the fact that the sand earthworm dragon had already died and there were other monarch sprites present, it would have been impossible for him to capture a Heavenly King alive. If he didn't think of all this, how would he have been able to find the Heavenly King who was faking his death so easily? It was all connected. The more he thought about it, the more shocked Black and White Heavenly King became. This young man had devised all that strategy in order to catch that big fish with his insignificant strength. But actually, his strength is probably already enough to defeat a Heavenly King in a head-on battle. It's already very terrifying. When he thought about this and then thought about how he had planned to appear in a carefree manner not long ago, Black and White Heavenly King's face turned red. He barely did anything. At this point, he was even more embarrassed to show his face. He could only shrink back and continue to hide in the hidden area created by the Holy Brilliance Spirit and Dark Star Spirit. He sighed. Then, he chased in the direction where the colorful cloud disappeared. After all, no matter how strong the young inspector was, as long as his protective work wasn't over, he had to keep following. It was really difficult to be a Heavenly King these days. Chapter 360, The Shocked Big Boss of the Arrest Department. The Stronghold Valley was filled with malicious characters. The ground had turned into a lake. Countless cracks crisscrossed, and holes filled the ground. One could only vaguely see some damaged buildings from the valley's broken and collapsed mountain wall. A few sprite trainers of the Union rode sprites and flew in the sky, searching inch by inch with the valley as the core. There were also some sprite trainers digging bit by bit in the valley. They searched for valuable information, items, and some secret rooms. At this moment, at the end of the sky, a colorful cloud flew over. In just an instant, it flew to the sky above the valley and slowly landed. The two Union sprite trainers who were patrolling were shocked. When they saw the person on the cloud, their faces were filled with admiration again. Who? The cloud landed and gradually dissipated. Su Hao's feet stepped on the ground. It was a little muddy, so he snapped his fingers. Beside him, the dumb unicorn let out a neigh. Cold air came out of its nostrils and spread. In just a moment, a thick layer of ice formed on the muddy ground. On the ice, there were even some fine granules and bumps. This was to increase the friction of the slippery ice. Seeing this, Su Hao was very satisfied. It was not in vain that he carefully taught the dumb unicorn. Finally, it could accurately comprehend its meaning. But the training had been quite costly. After the ice floor was laid, he looked at Ayan. Ayan was flying a little higher, and with a fierce swing of its black robe, it spread continuously like a black screen, covering an area of more than 100 square meters. It covered, shook, and withdrew. In the blink of an eye, a few figures appeared on the empty ground. And a dozen sprites. They were the instructors of Rainforest University who were at the forefront. They weren't weak, but at this moment, their foreheads were covered in cold sweat. As soon as they appeared, they looked around nervously. The energy in the sprites' bodies also started to surge. Little. The leading instructor was suddenly stunned. When he saw Su Hao at the side, he asked, "Did we escape?" In his opinion, there were only two outcomes. Either they were caught and killed, or the other possibility was that they had successfully escaped. At this moment, the leading instructor of Rainforest University didn't sense the terrifying aura of the monarch-level sprites. Thus, he could tell that they had successfully survived. To be able to escape from a monarch sprite, impressive, impressive. He sighed. Suddenly, he felt that something was wrong. This place. Here. Yes, this is the Valley of the Dark Society's stronghold. I'll have to trouble the few of you to continue searching for the hiding Dark Society members. Wait, wait. The instructor of Rainforest University was a little stunned. This was the Dark Society's base. There were no monarch sprites here. Could it be that it was the Alliance's experts who came to help and chased away the Dark Society Heavenly King? Yes, that must be it. He looked over. The young inspector nodded. That's right. I've already captured the Heavenly King of the Dark Society. He was imprisoned right next to the place where you were just staying. Oh, he's been captured, wait. In just an instant, the instructor of Rainforest University went from nodding to being stunned, and then to his pupils constricting and his mouth agape. The expression on his face kept changing. When they walked towards the valley, they were still dizzy and mumbling something. Oh, it's over. Oh, it's already over. They were mumbling such strange words. Su Hao couldn't help but be a little worried. Could it be that they had become mentally unstable after being affected by the monarch's pressure? The instructor of Rainforest University seemed a little weak. He shook his head and felt the burden on his body become heavier. Somewhere in the continuous mountain range, a team of 20 people from the Union and 20 sprite trainers were riding their respective sprites as they quickly moved through the forest. This team was formed by 2 master level and 18 elite level. It was a relatively strong peripheral team of the Union's main force. Their mobility was very strong, and they had already circled to the back of the right, preparing to intercept the escaping Dark Society members from this direction. That was the plan. But they recalled that not long ago, the doomsday scene of lightning and thunder. A huge earthen yellow ball of light. A huge explosion shook the whole mountain range. These terrifying scenes that they saw from afar still lingered in their minds. The captain, a middle-aged instructor from Rainforest University, was a little uneasy. But there was no signal in the forest. With just the wireless transmission of the wristband, he couldn't contact anyone else in the valley at this point. He could only continue to rush forward. The leader looked to his side, lowered his voice and said to a young instructor, "Later, if you encounter any invincible enemies, bring the group and run. Run without hesitation." The young instructor opened his mouth. The leader stretched out his hand to stop the young instructor from arguing back. You're still young and have a future. I should be the one that. As their distance from the valley gradually approached, an oppressive aura enveloped the team. Boom! Hearing the explosion in the distance, many sprite trainers in the intercepting team were shocked. Even the two leaders looked towards the source of the sound with solemn expressions, as if they were facing a great enemy. At this moment, a young man with a miserable and gloomy expression was carried by a mountain-moving ape and leaped out of the forest. He's from the Dark Society. Stop him! Hearing the sound, the instructor of Rainforest University instinctively attacked. A sprout broke out of the ground and turned into a huge vine in the blink of an eye. It wrapped around the mountain-moving ape that had leaped into midair and pinned the ape that was already injured. With a slight move, it captured the extraordinary level mountain-moving ape and its sprite trainer. It was so simple that even the team in charge of intercepting was stunned. In the forest, a bald sprite trainer emerged. He cupped his fists and thanked them. Fortunately, a few of you acted in time. Otherwise, it's very likely that he would have escaped. That inspector has instructed us to capture every single one of them. Wait. What did he mean by capturing everyone? Were we winning by such a large margin? When they heard what the bald sprite trainer said, they didn't quite react. After a long while, they finally understood that the battle had already ended. Most of the officers and leaders of the Dark Society had also been captured. Only a few masters were still fleeing. The outcome was set. In other words, the battle is basically over now, with only some scraps left to clean. The bald sprite trainer nodded and rode his sprite again to search for members of the Dark Society. In his words, these escaping members of the Dark Society were all worth merit points. The opportunity must not be wasted. The instructors and students from Rainforest University regained their senses. So, why were they acting so dramatically just now? The next day, inside the Arrest Department area headquarters building of the City of Glow. Knock, knock, knock. Come in. The black and white Heavenly King pushed the door open and entered. He arrived at the office with the Deputy Minister's name tag. The whole room was very spacious, but the arrangement inside the room was very simple. Behind the table in the center, a middle-aged man who was handling official business looked up. His shoulders were broad, and his expression was solemn. He gave off a dignified feeling without looking angry. When he saw who it was, the deputy head asked, "How's the situation?" All the important figures of the Dark Society in the stronghold have been captured. Moreover, a Heavenly King-level officer from the Dark Society has also been captured. According to the face comparison, he's a sprite trainer who has registered in the Union. However, his registration in the Union is only an ordinary master level. Currently, he's being interrogated. The Deputy Minister looked surprised and approving. Not bad, not bad. How did you deal with that Heavenly King? This. The black and white Heavenly King was embarrassed. He paused before saying, "I'm not the one who captured the Heavenly King of the Dark Society." He was worried that the Deputy Minister would think badly again, so he hurriedly added, "I haven't shown my face all this time, nor have I made a move." He was captured by Su Hao, who was undergoing the assessment of an intern inspector. He defeated the Monarch Sprite and captured the Dark Society Heavenly King alive. That's about it. The Deputy Minister. Are you kidding me? Somewhere in the City of Glow. At a special fire element cultivation venue. Boom. A sealed door slowly opened. Glazed flames burned fiercely, and a monstrous pressure spread out, stirring the wind and clouds. In the sea of fire, a handsome young man walked out step by step. The mark representing the fire laws on his forehead flickered slightly. Behind him, the intimidating fire god soldier with horns on its head appeared. Heavenly King, I've finally reached the Heavenly King level. At this moment, Sun was very excited. He picked up the wristband stored outside the door and began to read the news of this period of time. When his gaze landed on a certain line, he couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Dragon Nation Suhao has already defeated a heavenly king.